What's up, guys? We're now on part 3 of the most famous cryptid / myth in every US state. We're on the Midwest states, which, in my opinion, has some of the coolest legends, so hit subscribe right now, and we'll get into it. First up, we have the Thunderbird of North Dakota. The Thunderbird is a legendary creature that's considered a supernatural being of power and strength. Stories and oral history of the Thunderbird have been taught in the Pacific Northwest coast to the American Southwest, the East Coast, Great Lakes, Great Plains, pretty much everywhere here in North America it's been talked about. The legend says the Thunderbird was a benevolent spirit so large and powerful that when they flapped their wings, thunder was created, lightning flashed from their eyes, and water fell off their backs, creating rain. It's said that they're the enemies of the great horned snakes, and that because of this, they prevented them from overrunning the earth and devouring mankind, according to the Menominee people in northern Wisconsin. There's also a really cool story from the Pacific Northwest tribes that talk about the Thunderbird battling an orca or a killer whale that was evil. To summarize, the Quileute tribe's main food source was whale hunting, and so this evil orca whale was killing other whales to make them starve. So when the Thunderbird saw this from its home high in the mountains, it flew down over the ocean, plunged into the water, and tried to seize the whale. When this happened, a struggle ensued, and the ocean receded and then rose again, flinging many canoes around and killing many people. But eventually, the Thunderbird succeeded in lifting the whale out of the ocean and dropped it onto the land, where there was actually another fight, but I'm not going to get into that one. Some historians believe that the legend of the Thunderbird is actually based on discoveries of petrosaur fossils by Native Americans. That's a super cool legend. Moving on to South Dakota. In South Dakota, there's been reports of a monster just like Bigfoot, but it's said to have a top hat for some reason. It's called Taku-he, and honestly, I couldn't hardly find any information on it. But in the 1970s, there was at least a dozen sightings of this sandy-colored Sasquatch. Normally, it was said to be staring creepily at witnesses or dragging cattle from pastures. It ate a lot of cows. Also, sometimes it was said to wear a coat or a top hat. Don't ask me why, I have no idea. Nebraska, we got the Alkali Lake Monster. So the Alkali Lake Monster is widely believed to be a hoax to sell newspapers. It's described as a giant brown alligator with a rhinoceros horn on its nose, and it's said to be between 40 to 100 feet long. The main sighting claims that the horned alligator was attacking a car next to Lake Alkali in northwest Nebraska. And when the story came out, the people of Nebraska believed it wholeheartedly, but later on, when the attention died down, the publisher came out and admitted it was a hoax. Kansas, we have Sinkhole Sam. Sinkhole Sam is a worm-like creature that's said to inhabit part of Inman Lake in Kansas, known as the Sinkhole. So, before America was colonized by the Europeans, Kansas was covered up in small streams and rivers all over, but since then it's been blocked up and dried out, only leaving a few natural lakes and streams. Locals theorize that Sam is actually a prehistoric creature that lived in flooded underground caverns, and it somehow had to migrate to the sinkhole in Inman Lake to survive. The first sighting of it was from two men who were fishing in the sinkhole in 1950. They described it as being 15 feet long and as round as a car tire. That's a big boy. 10 years later, in 1960, a sighting of a similar creature was reported 50 miles south in Kingman State Park. This was of a snake that was so large that a tractor couldn't run over it. Woo! In the late 60s, a large search happened because of this sighting, but they only found snakes that were native to the area. They didn't find a giant snake. Really sad. Since then, there's been very few reports of any giant snakes in the area, but there have been reports in Kingman State Park of like a Bigfoot, Mothman, and a mysterious trench coat figure all around the Kingman State Park area. Minnesota. Do you guys want to guess what this one is? The most famous cryptid in Minnesota is the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a human-eating cannibalistic spirit. Even though in modern day it's always depicted as having antlers, based on Native American mythology, it does not. A lot of people are really adamant about making sure you know it doesn't have antlers. It's described as resembling a zombie or a corpse with a skeleton-like thin body, gray skin, sunken eyes, bloody lips, yellow fangs, and a long, slimy tongue. In some forms, the Wendigo is said to be human-sized, while others can be up to 15 feet tall. It's said to bring destruction and death wherever it goes, and when it gets close to you, you start to feel a cold chill. So it's said that a person becomes a Wendigo when they're either overpowered by greed or if they resort to cannibalism to survive. And once they become one, it's said they have an insatiable hunger for human flesh, and that they can also change their voice to mimic a loved one that you know to trick you to get closer to it. There's even a really famous case that's deemed to be a Wendigo possession. In the winter of 1878, a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta named Swift Runner suffered one of the worst cases that's known. He and his family were starving due to a brutal winter. Basically, his oldest son died of starvation, and in order to survive and not die of starvation himself, Swift ate his deceased son, which many say made him have Wendigo psychosis. After he ate his son, he ended up killing the remaining 6 members of his family and eating them too. Later, he was captured and sentenced to death. It's pretty interesting. I've done quite a bit of research on Wendigo psychosis and how it was actually debated in the medical field fairly recently, I think around the 1980s, but I'm not for sure. But I tried to find this information again, I couldn't find it, so maybe I just made it up. Iowa, we have the Van Meter Monster. The Van Meter Monster, or some call it the Van Meter Visitor, is a really cool story because it came from some really reliable sources. So there was a string of strange events that occurred in 1903 in Van Meter, Iowa, when several respected prominent men of Van Meter reported a half-human, half-animal with enormous bat wings flying around and terrorizing the residents throughout a span of several nights. Descriptions from those who saw it said it had large bat wings, a terrible smell wherever it went, and fired beams of bright light from its horn on its forehead. The story goes that the locals shot the beast multiple times, but it didn't affect it at all. Finally, after realizing that they couldn't shoot it to kill it, a group of townsfolk banded together one evening and chased the creature into an abandoned coal mine. There, at the coal mine, they said they were confronted by 2 beasts, the original one and then a smaller version of it. And then this is when a news reporter wrote this: "The noise opened up again as though Satan and a regiment of imps were coming forth for battle." That was in a newspaper, by the way. Then the men who chased them there shot them so many times it would have been enough to sink the Spanish fleet, according to the witnesses. And the monsters then escaped into the mine shaft, never to be seen again. Unlike a lot of other of these incidences, this one's really interesting because the articles go on about how they were extremely surprised that such prominent men would put their names in these stories, and they just said they were really reliable and that they wouldn't have wanted this publicity. Alright, now we're on to Missouri, the best state ever. Missouri's most famous cryptid is Momo the Monster. Also known as the Missouri Monster, eyewitnesses described this creature as a large ape humanoid that was 7 feet tall and covered in dark hair, and it was really stinky. It was probably my sister. The most famous sighting of Momo occurred in 1971 near Louisiana, Missouri, when 2 young boys were playing in their backyard and their sister heard them screaming. When she looked out the window to where they were playing, she said she saw a massive, dark-haired, man-like creature holding a dead dog. She said it had a pumpkin head, large glowing orange eyes. Some suggested that it was possibly a rogue bear, but others say it was definitely a monster. Besides that, there really weren't any other notable sightings. There was kind of a sighting where someone gave the Oklahoma City Zoo some 3-toed tracks because they said this thing had 3 toes, but the zoo said that the tracks were a hoax. So, alright, Wisconsin, we got the Beast of Bray Road. Basically, there's this road in Wisconsin where many people have reported seeing an overly large wolf-like creature, and then having strange encounters with them. So there was quite a few sightings during the 90s where people would say they saw a wolf-bear hybrid, or like a werewolf or dogman thing. Some say it was just an escaped pet wolf or feral dog, or even just a bear. Most of the encounters ended with witnesses getting scratches down the side of their vehicle by the beast. Some people say this is a real picture of it, but yeah, there's even a low-budget movie on it. Oh, and there was a episode of The Lost Tapes on it. That was a cool one, go watch it. Illinois, we have the Enfield Monster. Also known as the Enfield Horror, eyewitnesses describe this thing as either being an alien, or a demon, or a genetically mutated thing. It's really weird. They describe the monster as being this grayish-colored humanoid with 3 legs, a short body, pink eyes, and 2 little arms, kind of like a T-Rex. It was first seen in 1973 by 2 children who say they were attacked by it before they ran to their house. When they ran to their house, they said it tried to break in. And then their dad got home, their dad McDaniel, and he heard the story from them, and then he started hearing a scratching at the door, which he grabbed his gun, as he should, and he said when he opened the door, he first thought it was a bear, but then he realized it was a 3-legged monster that he believed was not from this planet. McDaniel said he opened fire on it and hit it immediately, but instead of falling to the ground, it just hissed at him like a wildcat. He then said that it jumped 50 feet in just 3 leaps before disappearing into the woods. And this thing actually had 3 other sightings. or 2 other sightings. After some researchers at Western Illinois University analyzed the incident and the other 2 first-hand encounters, they deemed the reports to be possibly a kangaroo. Pretty freaky. I could imagine a kangaroo looking like that though. Alright, on to Michigan, we got the Michigan Dogman. According to folklore, in 1887, a pair of lumberjacks chased a dog into a corner and poked it with a stick. At which point, the creature stood up on its hind legs, showing itself to be in fact a man dog, or a dogman, if you like. Like all good boys, the dog was perfectly peaceful, but the woodsman still ran away in terror. I probably would too. The description of this thing is what became known as the Michigan Dogman, a 7-foot-tall, blue-eyed, canine-like animal with the torso of a man and a creepy howl that sounds kind of like a human scream. Later in 1937, in Paris, Michigan, a man was attacked by 5 dogs and said that one of the 5 was actually walking on 2 legs. And similar reports actually happened in 1967. So according to legend, the Michigan Dogman appears in a 10-year cycle that falls on years ending in 7. Sightings have been reported in several locations throughout Michigan, primarily in the northwestern quadrant in the Lower Peninsula. So actually, this creature also came from Native American folklore, as it's said to have been stalking the Manistee area since the days of the Ottawa tribes. Alright, Indiana. So if you don't know, in the late 1940s, thousands of people made their way to the town of Churubusco, Indiana, to witness the attempted capture of a Volkswagen-sized monster that essentially was a giant snapping turtle. So the story goes, in 1898, a farmer saw a giant snapping turtle in a lake near his farm. A half-century later, in the 1940s, 2 people reported seeing a huge turtle that was 500 pounds in the exact same lake. When word got out of this creature, this led to mobs of people traveling there to see it being captured or to try to capture it themselves. I mean, they tried everything to capture it. They made a huge net, they drained part of the lake, and I mean, they even introduced a pretty lady turtle into the lake, but it didn't help. They didn't capture it. Really sad. But what's cool is, to this day, the town of Churubusco still has a festival in the turtle's memory. How nice. The Ohio Frogman. Also known as the Loveland Frog, according to Ohio folklore, the Frogman was first spotted in 1955 by a traveling Bible salesman driving at night who saw 3 men crouched in the road. He stopped his car and honked at them, and the 3 men turned around and were actually frogs. They then stood on their hind legs and stared at him. So later in 1972, a police officer in Loveland, Ohio, reported seeing a humanoid frog cross in front of his police car. He described it as being 4 feet tall, 60 pounds, and having leathery skin. He first spotted it crouched like a frog before it stood up erect like a human to climb over a guardrail back to the river. 2 weeks after this incident, a second police officer reported seeing an unidentified animal crouching along the road in the same area, but he shot and killed it and took it back to the other officer to show him. And it was actually a large iguana that was missing its tail and was probably an escaped pet. Mystery solved. However, later in 2016, 2 kids were playing Pokemon Go, and while they were out hunting a Pikachu in Loveland, Ohio, they claimed that a giant frog near the lake stood up and walked on its hind legs. Guess you can't catch them all. Anyways, that is all the Midwest states. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it more than you can ever know. This is a newer channel, and it would be awesome if you would like and subscribe. That would be epic. As always, stay cool and have a great day.